Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. At this time, I would like to invite General Mike Holmes to come forward to say a few words.
Thanks, everyone. Dr. Lucy, all of Mr. Greene's family, Mayor Gale, Chairman Slaughter, civic leaders, General Goldfein, Chief Welsh and Betty, officers, former commanders, family and friends. I know it's customary at these ceremonies to acknowledge all the distinguished visitors, but to Mr. Parker, every one of you would have been considered a distinguished visitor. Every relationship was important to him, and the lesson and legacy of Mr. Greene is just that. The secret to Mr. Greene and the secret to Mr. Greene's influence was that everybody he talked to was important and every relationship mattered. It would be an understatement to say I'm honored to have the privilege to speak as we celebrate the memory of Parker Greene. We talk in the Air Force about servant leadership, and that's exactly what Parker was. He was a servant and a leader, an advocate and a friend. Growing up in the Air Force as a young pilot, I was stationed around the Southeast several times, and so I had heard of Parker and, of course, Dr. Lucy. But I didn't get a chance to meet him in person until I was the 4th Fighter Wing commander up the road at one of those other bases during the base realignment and closure years. Needless to say, there was a rivalry between the bases and the communities. Both communities had convinced themselves that one or the other was going to be closed during that round of BRAC. Each thought they'd be the one to get BRAC'd, and Parker led the charge here at Moody. Few communities mounted the fight he and his fellow Valdostans did, and everyone up in Goldsboro admired him through it all. Everybody wanted to have a chance to learn from him, and everybody respected what he did because his passion for the base was unquestioned, and his relations with people were at the top of his list. Then when BRAC did affect Pope Air Force Base, the 23rd Fighter Group at the time was part of the 4th Fighter Wing and was stationed there at Pope, and that's when I met Parker and Lucy, was when we were making the handoff to start sending them from Pope, from North Carolina down here to Moody and this great community. As the years passed by, I grew on up in the Air Force. As the chief said, I got to make one of those Christmas cards one year. And when I talked to anybody about community leaders and about how things were supposed to be done, the conversation always came back to Parker and Dr. Lucy and the standards they set. As the stories are told, and when I talked to Mr. Parker, I think he believed the finest hour of this community was when the hurricane hit Homestead Air Force Base and the Air Force had to find a home for the rescue assets assigned there. The Chief of Staff of the Air Force called Mr. Greene and said, "Parker, can you take them? Can you make room for them at Moody? Can you bring them into that community?" And Mr. Greene, of course, said, "Absolutely." The whole community rallied to make sure that every airman and every family had a house to move into, had a spot in school for their children, and every airman and their families were welcomed into this community. So airmen who had lost everything were welcomed into a community with true Georgia hospitality. And one thing you should know about Parker is that once he gets his hooks in you, you're on Team Moody forever. And all these uniforms I see out here, some of them are stationed here now in the 23rd or in the 93rd AGAL, but many of them have traveled back to be a part of this day. And I'm proud to be here with them. After Dr. Lucy called to tell me the terrible news, I asked if I could reach out to some former COMACs to make sure they were aware of Parker's passing. And she said yes. And as they wrote back to me, one of them wrote back and said, "Well, he just knew that Mr. Parker greeted St. Peter at the pearly gates with a big bag of South Georgia nuts." Another one said, no, I'm sure he's found a way to be getting those to St. Peter all this time already to make sure he'd be welcome when he got there. And so I think he showed up with a styrofoam container of desserts. Because as many of you know, Mr. Greene had a real spot in his heart for our defenders and for the guys guarding the gate. Perhaps it was his military policeman time, but he always thought of those security forces guys in their lonely posts securing the base. And every visit I ever made down here, when we went out to dinner with Mr. Greene, he ordered an extra round of desserts. And if he couldn't deliver them himself, he would ask whoever was with him to stop by and drop them off at the gate and make sure they knew that Mr. Greene was thinking about them. So I'm pretty sure that Parker arrived at the pearly gates, that St. Peter and Parker recognized each other as guardians, that they shared a piece of cake or a piece of pie and had to talk about garden gates and taking care of communities before Parker was ushered in. We'll all miss Mr. Parker Greene. You lost an amazing member of your family, of your community. Our Air Force, which was his Air Force, lost a giant. But you need to know that you will always be a part of the Air Combat Command and Air Force family, and that Parker Greene's legacy will always be a part of our Air Force history. I'm honored to have the chance to be here on behalf of all the Air Combat Command commanders and all the tactical air combat commanders before them, and to say thank you, Dr. Lucy, for the invitation to be a part of this as a representative of all of them, and to say Godspeed to Parker. God bless your family, Lucy, and all who are proud members of this community. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, General Holmes.